Hey, everyone, I'm really happy to be joined with my good friend and colleague, Dr. David Litwa. David, it's really great to have you back on Esoterica. I'm always happy to be able to sit down. It's not every day that you get to sit down with a world class expert in something like Gnosticism and Hermeticism and just get to pick their brain and ask them questions. So I'm really excited to be able to do just that. So welcome back to Esoterica.
Pleasure to be here always, Justin. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. So, what I want to do is just we're going to hit on a couple of random things, folks. So, again, this is sort of random questions to Dr. Litwa, and I want to start off with the Gospel of Thomas. You've recently gotten a book out on the Gospel of Thomas. Could you say a little bit about that? It's like an introduction to the Gospel of Thomas. I haven't had the chance to read it yet, but for a text
Yeah,
that's been so popular, I'm curious. What's your introduction like?
I'm sure scholars think I've totally gone off the deep end because I noticed in the field, first of all, there's not really many introductions to the Gospel of Thomas. I mean, there's lots of like translations of it, and it ends up in a lot of like anthologies. But in terms of like a full blown introduction to it, um, there's not really that's not really on the market. So like full on chapters going through main issues. Um, but something that scholars hate and they avoid is calling it Gnostic. That's bad. That's really bad. Um, and I've done a 180 on this, and I think I've made myself a heretic. But I think this is so important because, on the one hand, when you look at the politics of the 1970s and the 1980s, there was this push to say, oh no, Thomas is not Gnostic, because Gnostic was basically like a way of saying like heretical and insignificant and marginal. And so we don't want the Gospel of Thomas to be marginal. And so there was this push to say, no, no, we want to mainstream Thomas. And one of the ways to mainstream Thomas was to say, well, look at all the synoptic stuff. Look at how it overlaps. So we can make Thomas talk about the synoptic problem, which we've been talking about for the last 300 years, right? And, you know, we can make this part of traditional New Testament scholarship. And then all that weird stuff about becoming Jesus and the divine light and I mean, we'll leave that to us to the side for the moment, and just look at the synoptic parallels. And that's really been the focus of a lot of the scholarship. And that is about half of Thomas. But to me, the really cool part of Thomas has been that half, which has stuff like, I will become him. Whoever drinks from my mouth will become as I am. You know, like that's pretty cool. Like where Jesus gives three secret words to Thomas, and you never figure out what they are. But if you did, you might get stoned and fire would come out of the rocks and burn you up. That kind of like weird stuff where you're pre-existent and you have a pre-existent image. Like, I mean, it's all kind of like woo woo. And that's kind of stuff that New Testament scholars, they don't really pay attention to. And so my theory was this that I think I think this text is mid-second century. I think is written in Egypt. I think whoever wrote this believed what we would consider to be, an esoteric version of Christianity. And I think they wanted to present a version of Jesus that was familiar to people. And so they included a lot of synoptic sayings, but also tacked on a lot of information that moved people in a new direction, a new interpretation of the old classic sayings, and then mixed in a lot of new sayings to lead people further along a path, what I would consider to be a Gnostic path, toward a new vision of Jesus. And so I call it a Gnostic gospel, but it's an exoteric text rather than an esoteric text, because it's it's meant not to shock you. It's meant to be familiar. It's meant to sound like, oh yeah, this sounds vaguely synoptic. And even the way it's written, it's stacked in such a way so that you get a synoptic saying, then one of these new woo-woo sayings, esoteric sayings, and then another synoptic saying, and then an esoteric saying. So it's kind of like stacked so that you're not overwhelmed by the new and the novel. Um, and that's kind of how it flows. So you're led deeper and deeper into this new image of Jesus, but along the way, you're never quite outside the familiar Jesus who's been talking to you, in the language of the synoptics. And I think that's quite intentional. But at the end, it is a very different Jesus. It is the Jesus, the light over them all. And if you don't get that, well, read it again.
Right, right. And folks, I'll have the link down below in the description for Dr. Litwa's new book if you want to check it out. I'm looking forward to reading it myself. And this sort of gets me to my first question, and you've kind of answered it. Is that I'm curious, like, what's the big takeaway from the Gospel of Thomas? In the sense of, you're reading it in this interesting way. What do you think the big thing that, when the people or the person that composed it, what do you think that their ultimate agenda was, theologically, rhetorically? I love the idea of sort of a rhetoric of getting you something you're familiar with, and then putting in a little bit more stranger things, and that rhetorical device of inviting people into a more esoteric Jesus. But what do you think that the ultimate takeaway is from the Gospel of Thomas?
Okay, so my crazy theory is it's responding to John. John says that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that he's the only way to the Father. And Thomas's message is that each and every one of us is the only way to the Father. That is, the exclusivism proposed by John to concentrate the divine light on a single incarnate figure is blasted open so that the shards of divine light are incarnate in all human beings. Jesus remains the light above them all. It's not totally clear that he's ever fully incarnate. It's said that he appears among human beings and that he has compassion on human beings who are drunk. And he's obviously speaking, he's a talking head throughout the gospel, but it's never said that he becomes flesh, as in John. And throughout, this is in agreement with John, the flesh is disparaged. In John, we have the flesh profits nothing. The world is a carcass. The flesh is something that we discard. So the difference then is we have the light within. John says that the light comes down and, it becomes flesh, that the Logos becomes flesh and becomes the light within all human beings. Thomas says there is light within a person of light, and that shines upon the whole world. Jesus says, I'm the light of the world. Thomas says, that light of the world is in everyone. So it opens up the exclusivism of Thomas, and it basically what it does, and this is why I call it Gnostic, is it takes this Gnostic theme, and it's one among many themes, but which is the divine spark, and it translates it for Christianity and makes it Christian, basically. puts it into the lips of Jesus, something that was a theme in other literature, and makes it a fundamental Christian theme, while at the same time toppling that theme, that exclusivism in John, but doing it in a very subtle way, like not out and out saying, you know, John's wrong. In fact, it sounds a lot like John, even when it's disagreeing with John. That's my take, anyway.
And in terms of the theology of that's informing it, would you say that it's in the Yonine tradition, or would you say that it's, some people talk about Thomasine Christianity, or that it's a unique branch, but do you think that the trajectory is theologically has its origins in the Johannine literature?
I think they're all part of the same larger theological stream. I mean, when I often like to say they're more similar than they are different.
Hmm.
I mean, the vision of Jesus isn't the wild-eyed apocalyptic prophet, the man of Galilee. It's the mystagogue. It's the talking head teacher. It's the guy whose feet don't seem to touch the ground often. He kind of floats around and has these long discourses, parables, which, people half understand. He often uses misdirection. He sort of sounds like Yoda, both in the Gospel of John and in the Gospel of Thomas. So the character is the same. It's just that the message is somewhat different. So, my crazy theory is that they're both Alexandrian, and they come from a sort of a cultural matrix where Christians were trying to see Jesus as a sage, somewhat like Pythagoras, whereas in other kind of contexts of Christianity, that wasn't the goal. They much preferred the apocalyptic prophet, um, who was, much more concretely embodied and had much more local Jewish color. Um, I don't really read that in either Thomas or John. He sort of floats above history in both texts as a character.
Mhm. And I guess that leads me to my second question about Thomas. Is that one of the I mean, and there's a lot of strange things in the Gospel of Thomas, but one of them that stood out to me is saying 12, where he basically says that heaven and earth were made for James, the brother of Jesus, and that seems to be in the sense that Jesus as sort of the Johannine Jesus, the Thomas Jesus, is floating above the world. That in terms of talking about his literal brother James, flesh and blood brother, younger brother James. That seems to re-anchor him back into the world, and and I've always found that saying to be unusual, more unusual than many of the others. And I was wondering what you make of that, given the otherworldly Jesus that we get in Thomas and in John. Here, sort of, the lights being shined on James all of a sudden, to what to me seems like a quite a spectacular way.
It's definitely an erratic block. There's no doubt about it. But what's ironic about it is some scholars want to make so much of that saying. So April Dedegonic, for instance, wants to say that originally the Gospel of Thomas like emerged in Jerusalem in the year 50 when James was the leader of a Jewish Christian group, and that it was a rolling corpus, and that they eventually changed the nature of their message. I actually follow another great scholar of the Gospel of Thomas, Melissa Harl Sellew, on this one. Her theory of saying 12 is that it is satire. Why? Look carefully at the language. James, for whom heaven and earth came into being. Is heaven and earth something good in Thomas? When you look at all the instances of earth and world in Thomas, every single one of them is negative. In fact, the world is called a carcass at least twice in Thomas, creation itself is denigrated. The being called the creator and God himself is apparently distinguished from Jesus and the Father in saying 100. So, this traditional Jewish sounding saying, for whom heaven and earth
Mhm.
came into being, you know, it sounds like it has this local Jewish color. But then you look at how Judaism itself is portrayed in the text in saying 52 and 53, and oh my goodness, it is so shocking how this author thinks. It's a violent attack on circumcision. He says if God wanted circumcision, then babies should have come out circumcised. You know, so everything we know about creation, the world, heaven, earth, Judaism, all that's negative. And then saying 12, James, so it's almost a satire. And then when you look at leadership itself, like, are the apostles, like the initial question in saying 12 is who's going to be our leader,
Right.
right? Well, are any of the apostles, apart from Thomas, perhaps, are any of the apostles really good at being a leader? Are any of them really upheld as even remotely intelligent?
Mhm.
Look at the very next saying 13, where Peter and Matthew are upheld as basically half right. I mean, adults, basically, which isn't uncommon. So I don't know. The whole idea of being an apostle isn't even a good thing in the Gospel of Thomas. So to go to James, your leader for whom the world came into being, it it doesn't sound good in light of the whole constructed narrative. Admittedly, April DeConnick might be right, but I don't think so.
And it's interesting then that either way you read it, right? You can read it the way that James Tavor reads it, or you can read it in this satirical way. What's interesting in both accounts is that both seem to acknowledge that James was of weirdly central importance. That either he has to be singled out for denigration, as well, in this satirical read, or he's on on James Tavor's read. It's an early saying to show how important he is. And I find that this again, this is a project I'm working on, but that him being singled out for either reason still points to his seeming importance in the aftermath of the execution of Jesus. So yeah, it's a fascinating read on either how you read it. What comes out in the wash is that James is weirdly important in a way that will be not so um, shortly
Yeah,
thereafter.
no, fair enough. I mean, historically, you're right. Like, if we had a time machine, he like history has been so whitewashed and memory has been so changed by the time you get to the second century. Um, yeah, I'm not even sure we have a reliable window into James, but yeah, if you had to guess, Christianity probably did, initially look a lot more like the initial development of Islam, where the leadership stayed within the family. That's
Right,
completely
caliphate.
plausible.
Yeah,
Completely.
yeah, that seems. Yeah, and I'm working on a project about Jesus, and this is a question that looms large in my head. And but anyway, it's just it's an interesting, like I said, either way to read it's interesting. It comes out same in the wash about his importance, either through denigration or otherwise. Um, One of the interesting things about the Gospel of Thomas, before we leave it, and really this is just an encouragement. This is meant to whet people's palate to go get your book and read it, which I really want to do. Is that some of the early manuscripts, the Greek manuscripts that survive, seem to have um, elements in the scribal notation to indicate that this text was read out loud. And this is a thing that is interesting to me because part of one of my long-term interest in Gnosticism is the liturgical aspects of Gnosticism, where we get some depictions of these 5 baptisms in some of these texts that seem to involve um, Greco-Egyptian style magic with the use of fire and various kind of passcodes and stuff like that. And so the liturgical life of so-called Gnostic churches interests me, and I'm interested to hear you say a little bit more about, or to speculate maybe about how this text may have functioned, if it may have functioned in a liturgical way.
Yeah, so there's actually some debate there. So conservative scholars, they want to say, well, just some background. So we have three papyri, third century papyri of Thomas, all found in one fine spot in Oxyrhynchus, which is
Oxyrhynchus.
Middle Egypt. And if you read conservative scholars, um, they want to say that, well, these papyri, they don't look like other biblical manuscripts, besides the fact that, one of them was found right next to the Gospel of Matthew. Um, they don't, they're not written on um, parchment, or they look too sloppy to be biblical manuscripts, or the handwriting is not as good, or, like, the workmanship of the manuscript itself, or the lines. Like, you see these arguments, and Anne Marie Lewandike, who is at Princeton, has a wonderful article, I think, that is an antidote to all of this. Her article is called "Reading the Gospel of Thomas in the Third Century." I have a summary of it on my website, which is the Gnostic Archive. Um, it's buried away, like so many academic articles. It's buried away in in a collection of essays. Um, but basically, she says one of these one of these papyrus fragments, and one of them is, it's interestingly written on the back of a land survey, which might not suggest that it was, read in church, uh, that, it might have been a private copy. But one of them has these little dots on it that looks like someone, specifically made notations for reading it in a liturgical setting, like, so that, you knew where your eye was supposed to go, because it's not easy to read an ancient text because there's really no punctuation. The words are all smushed together. Um, so I think, you know, the tendency, again, is just to imagine the Gospel of Thomas as always weird, But again, when you look at the papyri in the third century, it's just as well attested as the Gospel of Matthew. It's better attested than the Gospel of Mark. It's just as likely that it was read in the churches of Oxyrhynchus, So it's not, it it seems to, it seems to be less read beginning in the fourth century, when people began to associate it with Manichaeanism. But then again, that just proves that the Manichaeans were reading it, and, I would say that they're a type of Christian too. So, like, it's all a matter of value judgment, like, and um, I I think it's cool the Manichaeans were reading it. I don't think that's like a point against it, So, at any rate, that's the politics that we have today.
Yeah, yeah. I just like I said, I'm always interested in sort of the liturgical developments of how the church, or the Christianity, developed its inner liturgical life, and what's being read, what rituals are being done, looking at the Didache versus other texts. You get a sense that you know as a sacramental religion, you get a sense that there's kind of a sacramental chaos, that there's lots of ways of doing this. And it's always interesting to note that even something as simple as baptism, it's clear that, assuming that the baptisms outlined in the steles of you or whatever, or were ever done, who knows if they were done or if they were part of a community or whatever, that that even basic things that we think we fully understand, like baptism, had a wide berth of understanding of what they were. in early Christianity. And again, not only what accounted as scripture, but the idea that you could have walked into a church and all of a sudden they're reading about, the lion eating the man, and man, you're like, what in the world, you know? Um, but yeah, like you said, that we might have walked into a church in Oxyrhynchus or whatever, and they said, whoever tastes of these words will not, whoever understands these words will not taste of death. What a fundamentally different church that one could imagine than sort of what came out in the
Definitely.
wash.
And there are Gnostic churches today reading the Gospel of Thomas. So,
Sure.
some things change, some things stay the same.
Right. No, that's right. Yeah, history may not repeat itself, but they say it rhymes. So here's the rhyme. Well, speaking of Egypt, one of the really exciting things that you're working on and that I'm really enthusiastic about is that you're hoping to go. You're hoping to really not just be an expert in Alexandria, an expert about early Christianity, Gnosticism, Hermeticism, but really take that show on the road and really walk in the literal footsteps of the folks that were doing that. So you're taking a tour. You're wanting to take a tour to Egypt, and I really want one. I want that to happen, and two, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on, is I want you to let folks know what you're doing. Folks, some folks saw my Egypt trip. If you missed mine, absolutely, this is a trip you want to go on. And Dr. Lit was far more of an expert on Gnosticism, Hermeticism, those kinds of things than I am. I have my expertise, but this is a guy who's really written the book on it. And what an opportunity, what a real delight it would be to be able to roam through the streets of Alexandria or Middle Egypt and learn from someone who's really done the academic work, and also really highlighting the spirituality of these texts, which I also don't take for granted in all this. So tell us about your Egypt trip.
Well, I appreciate that intro. Yeah, I'm not a guru. I'm like yourself. I'm a scholar, but I do believe strongly in the sacredness of this place. I'm looking forward to going there and smelling that air, which has preserved papyri for 2,000 years. I'm looking forward to seeing the underground of Alexandria, going deep into that time capsule, seeing those catacombs, checking out those museums. I'm so looking forward to, yeah, covering some of the same ground that you did in Hermopolis, doing Amarna, Beni Hassan, the tombs there, going up into the cliffs, seeing the Nile Valley. Yeah, getting a sense for where some of these ancient texts were discovered, how they were discovered, what the ancient environment was. Also, what the Egyptian desert looks like, like that's so important just to like get a sense of, where so many people had these mystical experiences, where so many monks and nuns lived and died. We're going to be going to some places that are a little bit off the beaten path, like Taposiris Magna. I asked our um, the basically, well, her, Aubrey, of Argos, take us to a place where we can get a sense for where the Therapeutai, which is this Jewish mystical group, where we can get a sense for their, what it would have been like to see where they lived. And she said, well, let's go check out Taposiris Magna, it's outside of Alexandria, and it's a very ancient sacred site to Osiris. We don't know exactly where the Therapeutai were. Some people even say that maybe they didn't exist. I think that they probably did, but we may not be able to have any kind of archaeological remains. But what's there, I think, will give us a very good sense for a monastic community that lived right outside of Alexandria. And, a lot of this stuff is just meant to like fund the imagination in a sense. Um, it might generate a spiritual experience for people. I mean, that's great. Um, I hope it will. Um, I hope at least that it will just fund the imagination so that they will be able to creatively experience this and then go back and read the texts in a new, fundamentally new way, in a much richer way. And of course, like yourself, I'll be creating a PDF packet with lots of these texts and snippets, you know, so that they can immerse themselves in it before and after the trip. So yeah, I you know, it's not just hype in the sense that it is a kind of initiation. Um, it is in the sense that um, in the sense that you're going to a place that it has a kind of value to see it. Like,
Mhm.
it costs money, like, but it's also worth it.
Yeah, you're
Um,
you're investing in memory. I mean, it's one of the most important investments that you can make is in the tactile, haptic memory of learning in situ, which I have to say is there's just nothing like that. You there's one thing we one of the things we did on my trip was we got into the tomb of Unas and we just worked wall to wall for 2 hours, reading out loud the what is basically the oldest mentions of the afterlife in human history, and like the first idea of afterlife, first the idea of soul, the first time the soul really shows up in literature. And it just, I don't care how hard bitten of a skeptic you are or whatever your beliefs are, there's something so deeply important about that as part of the human experience that it's just numinous, full stop. And so to study, these texts, that have dramatically shaped the direction of Western civilization, spirituality, philosophy, in the places in which they're written, is simply there's simply nothing like it, just in my opinion. And that you're going to do that and offer your expertise, all the more deepens the possibilities of that experience, I think.
yeah, and for lovers of the Hermetica, you know, we'll be doing we'll be doing Hermopolis. I think there's a lot of things that resonate with the Hermetica in Alexandria as well. There's a lot of objects that I want to see and I want to be able to point out specifically to people. Um, you know, and on a lot of trips, I think on a lot of tours, it's like information overload, and you just go there and you take a bunch of pictures, and like it sort of washes over you and you don't remember much, and then you take a plane ride home, and then you might put together like a scrapbook, um, but that's kind of it. Like, you don't actually remember much, and I think what we're trying to do here is we're really trying to make this a memory in a deeper way. So the value add here is that we've got daily lectures from myself. We've got an Egyptologist, because no one can do the whole history of Egypt, right? Like, obviously not. So I'm doing, Greco-Roman period stuff. I'm doing the Hermetic stuff. Um, I can do Philo. Obviously, I do early Christianity. So I've got a chunk of it, but when we go to Amarna, when we go into Giza and the Sphinx, we're going to have an Egyptologist there, and I'm going to just be enjoying that, and shutting up. So, yeah, I mean, in Unas, I mean, what do I know about Unas? We'll read the text too, um, but yeah, like, for me, it's a full on experience, and it's not only lectures, it's discussions. Because one of the things I notice about these tours is people see things, and everyone sees it a little bit differently. And like, whether it's like a little piece of iconography, or a weird hieroglyphic, or like a picture, they bring that to the table and they want to talk about it. And they often have an insight. And so, I told Aubrey that, yeah, ideally every afternoon or early evening, before or after dinner, I just want to have everyone sit down and just tell the group what their experience, what they saw, and then just have that kind of like sink in, you know, because otherwise in a tour group, this one is 8 days, 9 nights, or sorry, 9 days, 8 nights. It just goes by so fast that it doesn't sink in. And so we need to really like help each other rivet those memories to our souls, as it were, and make it an initiation.
Yeah. What are you looking forward to most? When you think about sort of you're going to be on the tour too. What are you looking forward to? What are you looking forward to seeing the most?
Well, I'm going to fly in a day early, and everyone will have an option to do this. So I'm going to fly in a day early. We're going to go to the Grand Egyptian Museum, which is brand new. So everyone will have an opportunity to do that just if they come in a day early. Um, you know, I, like to me, I guess just getting the lay of the land, um, and experiencing the place in living color. Um, like I mentioned before, breathing the air and seeing the desert, seeing the night sky, which has been there for so long. I know that's, people would normally say, like, oh, I want to see the pyramids. But, to me, obviously that's very special. But to me, like, seeing the Egyptian desert is so important. The cliffside, the tombs, the underground, smelling it. Um, and yeah, that underground iconography, the inside of some of these places, getting a whiff of it,
Mhm.
that really, that's what I'm looking forward to. Just fully on that tactile, touching some of these stones, um, as much as they allow.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think one of my favorite memories is being on one of the mountains outside of Hermopolis Magna, and you look in one direction and you can see Kemet, the black soil, and you can look the other direction, and that's the Sahara, and that's Deshret, the red soil, and you're standing on the liminal right in between the world of Kemet, which you can see, and Deshret, which you can see, and you scoop up a hand of sand, and that's the Sahara, and then you walk, you know, 30 meters in the other direction, and you scoop down your hand there, and it's black, soil. And there's something
Yeah.
about that you know, um, yeah, it settled. It made an impact on me. It was very like powerful, a very powerful experience.
And that hasn't changed. Yeah, I mean they've changed the fact that the Nile doesn't flood, but the soil they haven't changed, the air they haven't changed, and
So the air is a bit different in Cairo,
yeah,
but,
fair
but yeah,
enough.
get out to Hermopolis Magna, and it's a bit better air than Cairo.
Right. Yeah, and that's what I think is good about this trip. Like, Middle Egypt, Hermopolis Magna, Taposiris Magna, getting off the beaten path, getting where tourists aren't, and then breathing that air and seeing those sights. I think will be the most refreshing thing, and the fact that Argos is good at luxury, so you'll be able to refresh yourself in 4 and 5 star hotels also, and not have to listen to me all day. You can um, you know do your own thing after 4 p.m. and just sleep or whatever you want. It's a luxury trip, but they do a nice job. So
Yeah, I can testify. I can testify. I've done 2 back-to-back trips with them, and can say that, for folks, if you can go on a trip to Egypt with a scholar, this is a scholar. This is a trip. Highly recommend folks to check it out. You can find all the information down in the description and in the pinned comment. Again, I really think this trip is a trip for a life. And like I said, it's not often that you get to see Egypt with all the power that comes with that, but also to have access to a scholar who's written book after book after book on these incredibly important esoteric spiritualities, and to be able to have access to both of those in the same room. I think it's just an incredibly important thing, and I would highly encourage folks to take a look at Dr. Litwa's trip. Like I said, that's all going to be in the pin comment down below if you want to check that out.
And if people want to go see the open house where Aubrey goes through the set of questions, it's on my channel, and through the whole itinerary. Go to town. Um, I've got about 1.5 hour more because I've got to go right into the Greek lesson after this, but we've got plenty of time for Pistis Sophia. So
Okay. Yep. Yeah. So let's move in that direction. Like I said, folks, yeah, check out the trip to Egypt in November. Right? It's in November, but
yeah,
but registration. Tell us more about registration. When is registration is open? Early bird discount, $500 off. So
definitely. Yeah,
you
yeah.
know you
Take
don't want to get
advantage
your
of
five
that.
hundred dollars
Yeah,
off, but when does registration end? This is the really important thing. Folks need to make up their mind, and you got to commit.
yeah. So it ends September 15th. So that's not a lot of time. But I definitely want everyone take advantage. Get the $500 off. You got to do that before August 25th, though. So please, I know that this is a lot, but it doesn't make any sense to wait after August 25th. Get that $500 off. If you're going with your partner, you can both get $500 off, and spread the word.
Yeah, absolutely, folks. Check that out. Like I said, my ringing endorsement. Ringing endorsement. So I baited you folks in with Gospel of Thomas, but now I'm going to shift to what I think is the most profoundly strange Gnostic texts that we have, and I'm basically just, again, this is one of the great things about having this channel and being able to hang out with your friends is to be able to pick a real expert's brain about a topic that I find endlessly fascinating, and that's the text of Pistis Sophia and the books of you. These are texts that I find, especially the books of you. I think this is my favorite Gnostic text. Whatever well, all that is. And this is a question I want to pose to you, and again, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this, but to get your expert opinion, why don't these books get more air? They're the earliest Gnostic texts that we've discovered in modernity and that survived down into contemporary life. They're huge. They're substantial texts. I mean, the Braille edition of the Pistis Sophia is a brick, as opposed to the Gospel of Thomas, which is just a few pages, or the Apocryphon of John, which is 30 pages or so. This is hundreds of pages of text. And so, one of the weird things I've noticed is that despite the fact that they're recovered relatively early, that they're enormous, the Pistis Sophia is almost as long as whole sections of the Nag Hammadi library combined. Why don't these texts get more scholarly attention? Why aren't we hearing about them, about the books of you and the Pistis Sophia more?
Well, the short answer is they're not like the New Testament, right? So Thomas gets a lot of attention because it's half of it is synoptic. But the long answer is, and it's a darn shame because you're right. Um, these texts were discovered before America was a nation.
Mhm.
Okay, before America was a nation, we knew about them. Now, that being said, with Pistis Sophia, we had to wait until 1851 to get a Latin translation. And the first guy to translate it into English, G.R.S. Mead, didn't know Coptic. So he translated from the Latin. So it's a translation of a translation. So to get a decent readable translation into English, we had to wait until 1978. That being said, there still is no good excuse for the almost utter and complete neglect of this among scholars. Now, it's slightly different among popular esotericists, like theosophists,
Sure. G.R.S. Mead.
um, like Mead
Right.
himself, uh, and among several French and English and some Germans who were just esoteric practitioners, uh, and a few in South America as well.
Yeah. And the Latter Day
They
Saints, and weirdly, interestingly
Yeah,
enough, the Latter Day Saints have had a particular interest in Pistis Sophia and the books of you.
so they have done a better job than scholars, and I say that to the shame of scholars. Um, there's also, interestingly enough, like the first modern language edition, it came out in French in the late 19th century, and it it had this misleading introduction saying that Valentinus wrote it,
Hmm.
and then in the German language edition, there was a long article written that it was Ophite, and both are like completely misleading. Like it has nothing to do with that. When you read the Pistis Sophia, and I think overall there's more interest in the Pistis Sophia because it 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 looks it it it's more full. It's very it's like the most perfect Sahidic. Like if I was teaching a Coptic class, I would teach it from the Pistis Sophia because it's like the most crystal clear Sahidic you could read, very repetitive, um, and it's a story of Pistis Sophia, faith, wisdom in books 1 and 2, and in books 3 and 4, it's more books 3 is very ethical focus. Book
Hmm.
4 is is a lot about like the punishment of souls. It's book 4 is a lot more like the books of you, and I think one of the reasons that people avoid it is it is hard to read. I mean, in the sense that it's very repetitive. It's highly focused on metaphysics. It's got a lot of words and names, a lot of magical formula, a lot of hard to read names. Um, and so, yeah, some people think it's monotonous. I think if you boil it down, especially into the Pistis Sophia, it's a pretty good story of wisdom. I mean, it's peppered with these hymns, and so that can get kind of monotonous. But if you like hymnology and liturgy, that wouldn't be boring for you. Um, and it's interesting also in terms of biblical interpretation because whoever wrote this thing apparently had a very expansive idea of the canon because they're
Hmm.
bringing in psalms, they're bringing in the odes of Solomon, they're bringing in the Psalm of Solomon. So
Hmm.
they're apparently thinking that you know they've got a pretty big Bible. And my good friend Sarah Parkhouse has a good article on the canon of Pistis Sophia recently. But in terms of any scholar doing any work on this, we've really got only one recent monograph by Aaron Evans, which is good, but I didn't find it totally compelling just because there's so she presents a theory which I don't know, like she has so few dialogue partners, but basically it's a theory of how to divvy up the text in a new way and how to read the text. And she imagines that there's a group of Jewians or Ewians, I guess. I don't know how she would pronounce it, but who are antagonistically related to previous groups like Sethians and Valentinians. And I think it's correct to say that who's ever writing these texts, and Pistis Sophia is, it's probably just a third century Christian text. We don't know how unusual it is. It talks about classic Egyptian themes, which for me aren't unusual at all. Stuff like reincarnation, stuff like the deification of the mind. Some of the things that might be unusual, like if people have like Gnosticism, like the broad category of Gnosticism in their head, like it has to include an evil demiurge, or it has to include certain things like divine spark, and it has to include certain things like hatred of the body. You don't really see that. But you do see some interesting things like it doesn't have any problem with like hell and like apocalyptic
Hmm.
punishment, afterworldly punishment, which is cool. Like some people think like Gnosticism can't have punishment after death, but clearly it can. So like it combines things. It's surprising, and yeah, it just I think that as a combination of it's not normally what people think of as Gnosticism, plus the fact that it's really hard to read, has basically made it difficult for people. But that's no excuse. And I think it's a darn shame that scholars are frankly, um, it might be like Orientalist stuff in there as
Mm,
well, like the sense that, um, like if you take Hans Jonas for instance, like Jonas didn't even have Nagamati, and I like so when he described Gnosticism, like you would have thought like, oh, well, obviously he would use the books of you and Pistis Sophia, but he doesn't.
mm-mm.
Like it's like they
Yeah,
don't
that's it's
exist.
such a strange. That's another thing I was going to say. It's like it's
And
like it literally that Pistis
and
Sophia represented more available Gnostic literature than everything else combined at that point, and he
right.
just like, eh. It's
And
so there's something I think that either it's a psychological thing or it's like an emotion. People are frightened of the book or something that it just or that it's so bewildering in a way that I don't know that to me the answer seemingly is either it's just it's long and difficult and therefore not, which is a bizarre argument for scholars because that seems to be the thing that scholars love the most is long, difficult, because that's just like job security. You could just mine this thing forever and never run out of articles to write about it. Or there's some other kind of weird other thing where the text is so strange, or I don't know. Um, but I was talking to Erin Evans about this, and she was advised not to work on it. Basically, she was just told, don't touch it, you know. And that's just something there's something taboo about and also the untitled text, right?
yeah.
That no one talks about.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I haven't seen anything on that. Not
Nothing.
anything at all, except for the edition itself. Like
Right,
there's not even a fair introduction on it.
right.
Yeah. It
And what's
doesn't even
interesting,
appear in the Nagamati library like
no,
texts, as like in the translations.
doesn't even
Yeah.
get a title.
Right.
Like,
It doesn't have a title. Yeah.
yeah, and the fact that they were found at the same time, which is interesting to me, that we found these two texts that, presumably, we don't know when the other was found, but these two texts were found roughly around the same time, seem to talk to each other, and we've never found another text like them since. That's so unusual to me that we've not found, you know, clearly the books of you and the Pistis Sophia are part of the same kind of literary environment. Um, and but what's interesting is that they seem to talk to each other, and yet we've not nothing like them appears in Nakamati. With the same kind of
Yeah.
cosmology, or you as the chief deity, or the demotion of Barbello to a sort of not just a demotion, but a demotion into the physical world, which is again Aaron's Evans argument that this is sort of a polemical text. I don't know. Those are just things about me that strike me as just extremely unusual about this text that
They
cry
mix
out
and
for
match the
some.
characters. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the theory is, and it's sort of prudish, but the theory is, and I think you see a little bit of this in Jonas, is that the books of you and the Pistis Sophia represent a degenerate form of
Right.
Gnosticism, that the
Too
pure
magical.
forms of Gnosticism are Sethianism, Valentinianism, maybe throw in Carpocratianism, I don't know, but like those pure forms of Alexandrian, Vesalides is in there too. But that by the time you get to the third century, and this was, generally anything late antique, like the further you got into late antiquity, the more degenerate things became. Um, so if these are third, maybe early fourth century texts that are just so syncretic, that are just like pulling from everything, and recombining, and then taking characters like Barbello and Adamas and Yaldabaoth and then, you know, making them into something new with like, you know, almost like reckless abandon. Um, it like they were making a new story. I think from the 21st century, we have no right to call that degenerate. But the question would be then, what on earth were they doing? Because I think we have to assume they were doing something intelligent, they were doing something purposeful, but what on earth did they think they were doing? And I personally, I mean, all due respect to Evans, I think the polemical theory could be right, but I think that there are also other ways of imagining that. It could be polemical, it could be playful, it could be there's just the sense that they, they felt like they had the sovereign right to retell the story, that they had a new revelation, and that they just felt like let a thousand flowers bloom, or, we don't know exactly what they were feeling. They don't seem overly polemical to me. Like, the only nasty thing that they have to say is there's this one case where they're like, oh yeah, there's these folks who are eating semen, avoid them,
Right. Yep.
but beyond that, it's not overly polemical
Right.
anyway.
And it's interesting, this phrase degenerate, and this is a phrase also again that you hear about the magical texts. And the books of you and the Pistis Sophia look more to me, in the they have this magical flair to them with all the passwords and keywords. And this is standing out large in my mind because I'm teaching a class on Hechelite literature, and Hechelite literature and the books of you look really similar to me. Like they, there's I don't think that's a coincidence. I think there's some weird connection that we don't really understand. But it's interesting to me that the magical side of things is what's focused on. Magical side of things is focused on, whereas what's clearly not degenerate is they have a very, very sophisticated cosmology and metaphysics that's really consistent. And that's what I think is really fascinating, is that this, I think part of what militates this degeneracy argument is the more magical elements. Whereas if you look at them as metaphysical and cosmological texts, they're the most sophisticated texts like that have survived from the sort of Gnostic milieu. And again, it's just like it's to me, it's an interesting question of what scholars decide to emphasize about these texts. Because I think if you again focus on them as cosmological or metaphysical texts, they're the most sophisticated texts that have survived from late antiquity. But it's this magical adjunct that makes them,
Right.
not so, makes them untouchable in some sense.
Yeah, and I think, what we're fighting against is that same thing that I'm fighting against in the Thomas scholarship. Like, I'm in Thomas scholarship, I'm fighting against this sense that, oh, Gnosticism is kind of a bad word
Mhm.
when used of Thomas. With Pistis Sophia and the books of you, like, syncretism is kind of a bad word. Whereas I would be of the opinion that no, it's not. Syncretism is something good. These people are genius. Like, their ability to combine, creatively, to create an amazingly complex system of metaphysics, something that explodes my brain. The fact that it explodes my brain is a good thing. It may make me want to throw the book against the wall. Clearly, it has that effect with other people as well. But it is, I mean, it is, in a sense, as you said, an amazing system. And I think the more one gets into it, yes, it's like falling into a well where more and more of it begins to make sense, which makes it more and more foolish for scholars to have not, for someone not to have fallen into this well and tried to make sense of it. And yeah, to do more comparative study with Hecklo and other things.
Yeah.
This is so ripe for analysis.
No, I find that there's a unique irony in scholars of early Christianity being wary of syncretism. I just, as a Jew, it just yeah, we're just like, really? You guys are
It's the
scared of
yeah,
syncretism?
it's the
Um,
old Protestant versus Catholics. Yeah, but it's the Protestants, they they thought that the Catholics were syncretists,
yeah.
and the Protestants built the universities. I mean, I mean, that's too simplistic a narrative, but it's kind of like still with us. But yeah,
Yeah. It's just, yeah, the stupidities we inherit, and don't realize, the unconscious stupidities we inherit and recapitulate, never cease to surprise me. Um, Dr. Litwa, where can people find you?
well, I hope there's not an AI version of me somewhere spewing obscenities and the opposite things, which I believe. I guess there's no way to prevent that without having some copyright of my face and voice. Um, but assuming that the world is honest, you can go to mdavidlitwa.com, get a bunch of free scholarly summaries of books and articles in the field of Gnostic studies. If you want the paid version, you can get everything, and support me along the way. I'm on Patreon too, just like everyone else trying to survive in this world. There you can get all my blogs, a bunch of discounts and early access to videos, and on YouTube as well. But yeah, the main thing I want to reiterate is if you feel called to come to Egypt, please do. Please don't wait. I want you to save as much as you can, um, and I want to meet you. And I want you to enjoy the trip of a lifetime. Frankly, folks, I don't know if I'm going again. The world is so messed up, and I guess we're not getting any younger. So don't wait.
Yeah,
Anyway, I hope
folks.
to see all of you.
Yeah, again, let me just reiterate, if you trust me, trust Esoterica, please let my voice be a vote in the direction of heading to Egypt with Dr. Litwa. I know there's a lot of folks who wanted to come on my trip, but couldn't do it for various reasons. Here's another opportunity that I can't stress enough just how much I really am, yeah, how much I really do believe in this trip, and really would hope that, for folks who are on the fence or who want to do it, do it. It's going to be great. It's going to be wonderful.
Appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Litwood, thank you for taking some time to hang out with me and field my questions on everything from Gospel Thomas to Pistis Sophia. So I really appreciate your time and your expertise. Again, folks, check out Dr. Litwood's channel. I'll have, again, links down and the pinned comment in the description. And support him. This kind of scholarship is independent, accessible scholarship that we're putting out there for free. And like me and everyone else, Dr. Litt is doing a tremendous service for not just the history of Christianity, but for people's spirituality. And I really feel like, that's the kind of guy we want to support. So check out his content, check out his Patreon, check out his Egypt trip. And it's great to have you on, man.
Thank you.